Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a massive 40-year paradigm shift in how we manage our digital lives. For decades, we've basically just taken the rules of digital storage for granted, assuming that to find a file, we first had to organize it. But what if that entire era is just over? Let's dive in.
Think about it. Have we literally spent the last 4 decades doing the computer's job for it? It's definitely a provocative thought. I want you to ask yourself if our entire approach to organizing digital files, meticulously naming them, sorting them into all those nested folders, has been fundamentally backward this whole time. Because, as we're going to see, we've been paying a heavy tax just to make our own data readable to machines. To really understand this shift, we need to look at a 3-act story.
So let's start with Act 1, open but chaotic.
This takes us way back to the earliest days of personal computing. It was essentially the Wild West. Information lived in raw files, and honestly, we were pretty much left to fend for ourselves. Look at 1980. The Sinclair ZX80 launches, bringing computing to the masses. But your storage was literally an audio cassette tape. No way. Then in 1981, the iconic IBM PC arrived with MS-DOS 1.0, and it was so basic it didn't even have folders. You just had a single root directory for absolutely everything. It wasn't until DOS 2.0 in 1983 that we finally got hierarchical subdirectories. The folders inside folders that we're so used to today? Early computers offered almost zero structural help.
And because of that complete lack of structure, we lived in a totally open format. You could type whatever you wanted, but the cost was huge. Finding anything meant relying entirely on your own human memory. Standardized searching and sorting, that basically didn't exist. There was this intense anxiety tied to file retrieval. If you forgot that cryptic 8-character file name you used 6 months ago, your data was essentially lost in the digital void forever.
Which brings us to Act 2, structured but rigid.
To escape that total frustration, the 1980s saw a massive boom in PC and Mac productivity software. These were the heavyweights that promised a better, smarter way to organize. You had VisiCalc, the original killer app spreadsheet that literally drove people to buy Apple II computers just to run it. Then Lotus 1-2-3 dominated by combining calculations and databases, and WordPerfect turned typing into a highly structured endeavor. These tools were a real game changer because they finally introduced the ability to truly search, sort, and calculate. But, and it's a big but, this order came at a severe cost.
That cost boils down to one word: schema. So what is a schema? Basically, it's a rigid, predefined structural format or blueprint that data must be forced into so the software can process it. Whether it was a spreadsheet, an early database, or even modern CRM tools, the software demanded that you pre-sort your ideas into its predetermined fields, records, and tables.
This right here is the conflict we've lived with for 40 years. Human thinking is naturally irregular and messy, right? It takes the shape of a half-formed idea, a quick sketch, or a sprawling conversation. But rigid software schemas, they demand square pegs for square holes. If you had a receipt, a handwritten note, and a vague project idea, the software basically said, too bad, pick a category, normalize it, or it doesn't fit. We literally ended up mutilating the natural contours of our thinking just to fit the rows and columns the software allowed us to use.
And that brings us to this incredibly poignant quote from our source material: "The map was never the territory, and the schema was never the thought." Decades of massive, highly expensive corporate knowledge management initiatives completely foundered on exactly this problem. We tried so hard, forcing fluid human knowledge into rigid digital boxes, and in the process, we totally lost the nuance of what we were actually trying to save.
And that leads us to right now, Act 3, flexible and intelligent.
The paradigm is shifting again, literally right under our noses. Look at the absolute chaotic, shapeless mix of modern data we deal with on a daily basis. We're talking voice memo transcripts, photos of messy whiteboards, scanned receipts, handwritten notes, and raw PDFs. Under the old schema paradigm, this heterogeneous mix is an absolute nightmare. But with the rise of local AI agents, tools like Claude, ChatGPT, Perplexity, and Meta AI, this mess is completely fine. These AI agents effortlessly ingest information in whatever format it naturally takes. No normalization required, no more square holes.
The new AI workflow radically changes the game. Step 1, you just dump the raw, unstructured information in. The whole shebang. Step 2, you simply ask the AI agent for what you need. And step 3, the AI finds, reshapes, and reformats the data completely on demand.
Instead of acting as a rigid filing cabinet, the software now acts as a fluid container, seamlessly adapting to whatever you pour into it. It can even advise you on how to optimize things further, which entirely removes the need to tag or sort your files up front.
Which brings us to the core insight of this explainer, the zero-cost era.
This is the massive shift in the burden of work that has quietly occurred. For 40 years, the burden of structure sat squarely on our shoulders. We paid the tax of organizing upfront every single time we saved something. But in this new era, the burden of structure sits on the AI. And most importantly, that tax is paid on demand, only when we actually need an answer. The software reads the heterogeneous mess, finds relevance, and structures it right then and there.
The big takeaway is this. The cost of not organizing your information has literally collapsed to near zero. Now, it's easy to brush this off as just a nice productivity feature, but it fundamentally changes human behavior. Because retrieval no longer requires pre-sorting, it totally frees us up to capture far more ideas in whatever form they naturally take and throw away far less. We can finally stop pre-sorting our thinking into someone else's predetermined categories.
I want to leave you with this provocative question. If storage no longer demands structure, what happens to 40 years of tools and workflows built entirely on the assumption that it does? It's a fascinating inversion. We spent decades building increasingly rigid software to manage our lives, and it turns out the way forward wasn't a better schema at all. It was an intelligence layer smart enough to not even need one. You definitely want to rethink your daily digital habits and look really closely at the legacy software you use every day, because the ground beneath it is shifting fast. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.